in my fire team was 4 men. It was Scarlato, Allen, Olson, Johnson, and Turner. We slept, we got drunk. We were very close with these. I was very close, and they died in my arms. The reason I mention these 3 fellas is because I visualize them. The PTSD is a horrible, horrible combat experience. I sleep in this chair in an L position because I cannot lay flat. If I lay flat, my nightmares get stronger. And I still keep this dagger to remind me that 60 years later, I'm here to tell a story to my grandkids, my grandchildren. Thank you. Thank you so very much. You got to give me a couple of seconds to to get adjusted. It gets very touching when you see certain things and remind you of certain places that you don't want to remember, but it happens. But before I start, there's some people that, when you do an event like this, it's just outstanding. And Pastor Park and and Terry and all the staff do an outstanding job. Naturally, you guys are outstanding. You are fabulous. I mean, I could think of a lot of words, but you're the future of America. And thank God that we have good hands. As Allstate says, you're in good hands. And I think you young people are going to prove to us, with the help of the Lord, that you are going to. I'm going to try and cover a few subjects. And actually, it pertains to me when I was a young boy, because I was a bad boy. And I grew up in a bad area. It's called Bedford-Stuyvesant section. And not to cover that part right now, but I want to cover faith, guardian angels, love, respect, honor, and naturally the most important thing is love thy neighbor. When I was small, my grandfather, my father's father, he read a lot of books in his own native language, and he believed in faith, and he believed in guardian angels. He was a firm believer that the day you were born is the path that the Lord wants you to follow. And he'll try to guide you in certain different ways, and believe me, he does. He guided me. Well, one incident happened to me. There was a park, and instead of going around this fence a block and a half away to get to this park, I decided that I'm going to climb this fence. This fence was about 25 foot high. So I decided I'm going to climb. About halfway up, I fell. And I fell right on my back. And my hands were spread out. And the only thing I saw was somebody on top of me. And he says, "I am Jude." So when I came to my senses and I spoke to my grandfather, he says, "You know who that was?" He says, "St. Jude is your guardian angel." So I believe in St. Jude. He's the healing of the mind and healing of the body. And I live by him. Well, a lot of other incidents happened to me while I was growing up. Like I said, I was not a good boy. I had respect, but I hated school. I hated teachers. I hated anybody that would teach me anything, which I was a fool. And as I grew up, like I said, I grew up in a very, very bad neighborhood, because at that time in the late 40s and 50s, this is when dope started to come into this country real strong. And the first neighborhood they hit was in Brooklyn, was Bed-Stuy section. So, plus, I had to belong to a gang. That, in my time, if you didn't belong to a gang, you were a punk, and people took advantage of you. And I became a wise guy. Just like my friends, there was about 15 of us who were all wise guys. We thought that we owned the neighborhood. We were bad guys. And a few other incidents happened where I got into a situation where I had to pray. I prayed to just about every saint that I could pray. I was in a fire one time, and unfortunately, one of my friends set a fire right under the Manhattan Bridge. There was an old shack, and me and two other guys happened to be in there, and this building collapsed. Well, I didn't think we would ever get out of there, but for some reason, we got out. And I think the reason I did is because my guardian angel forced me and helped me to get out. Well, as I grew up, I quit high school like a dummy, real dummy. Lucky I could write my name or spell my name, because I didn't want to listen to anybody. That's very important. You should listen to people that have more knowledge than you, and you get better. You would be better in life. So when I was around 16, my older brother, who was in World War II, to protect me, he said, let's join the Naval Air Reserve. I couldn't even pass the test. That's how bad I was. But I got in. Hook or crook, I got in, and I became a Navy aviator reserve for a couple of years. But the most important thing is I joined the United States Marine Corps. By the way, if anybody has any questions, you could interrupt me, and if you like, I'll answer it as quick as possible. Well, anyway, I belong to a gang, like I told you, and we had a social club. And there was about 15 or 18 of us, and there was about 10 older fellas that were World War II veterans. So when the Korean War broke out, I was only 17. So I couldn't join any military until I was 18. So a few of our neighborhood fellas were killed in Korea. They had their heads tied, they put pebbles in their mouth, and they were assassinated. So we decided that we should go into a branch because we didn't want to be drafted. So we had a vote, and we picked the Marines. There was 17 of us, or 15 of us, that joined the Marine Corps. Now, we went down to the recruiter 3 at a time. Now, you have to picture this in your mind. If anybody remembers or ever saw, we had tech pants, black, and then chartreuse pistol pockets. Everybody know about that? Our famous color was chartreuse. And so we went down there like 3 wise guys. So you know when you have take a test, I'm sure you know all about tests. They have the private booths where you're not supposed to see the other fellas' papers. Well, not us, because we were wise guys. So we sat down, two and one facing us, and we cheated. We actually cheated. And that was wrong, but that's what we did. That's because we thought we were wise guys. I mean, we learned a lesson later on. But anyway, the two recruiters spotted us, and one recruiter said to the other, we're going to pass them. They have to go to boot camp. And they're going to put a note in this area to look out for us in boot camp. If anybody knows a Marine Corps boot camp, you'll understand what I'm saying, I'm sure, if someone ever told you. Boot camp is next to hell. That's the magic word. War is hell, but boot camp is next to hell. Because they treat you and they have to train you for discipline and action. And in order to do that, they have to be very, very hard on you. So anyhow, we passed. In 2 weeks' time, we were shipped out to Parris Island, South Carolina. And the first thing, when you get off the bus, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. They make sure you get there kind of late. That's to antagonize you, because we were in Charlotte, North Carolina, for about 3 hours before they decided to bring us to Parris Island. And the treatment in boot camp is horrifying, especially from youngsters that didn't take orders too good. Like I said before, the Marine Corps makes you or breaks you. And believe me, they made us. So I went through 12 weeks of constant punishment. And being from Brooklyn, when the DIs, they like to emphasize on one person or two people to make an example. So on one inspection, they went to get my bayonet, and I closed my fist like this. So the DI says, "Are you a wise guy?" And then I, like an idiot, I said, "Yes, I'm a wise guy." He says, "Oh, okay." He says, "You know how to do push-ups?" I said, "No, I don't know what you mean." He said, "Well, get on the floor, put your hands, and start going up and down." So I did 25. I got up, and he says, "Where you from?" I said, "Brooklyn, New York." He said, "What's your nationality?" I said, "Well, I'm American, but my grandparents came from Italy." He says, "Oh, you're a gangster." So I was branded a gangster because I was Italian and came from Brooklyn. So throughout 12 weeks, they called me the push-up kid. I did more push-ups than anybody in the Marine Corps because I kept getting into problems. You know, every time they gave a certain order, if I didn't like it, I would rebel. But I went through this, and when I was in boot camp, they give you a manual. The manual is approximately 1 inch thick. And the DI says to you, "You're going to learn that manual from the first page to the last page, and I'll be asking questions." So that night I was on my rack, and I cried. I literally cried because I didn't know how to read properly. I didn't know how to write properly. So I knew I wasn't going to pass his inspection. So anyway, the guy under me, we had a double bunk. He heard me crying. This is where fate comes in. He heard me crying, and he says to me, he got out of his rack, he said, "What's wrong?" And I looked at him, and I sobbed, and I says, "I don't know how to read. I don't know how to read and know what I'm reading." I said, "I'm illiterate." He says, "You're not illiterate." He says, "You just don't know how to grasp an item and utilize it. So he says, I'm going to help you. And he helped me. This guy's name was Jim Nolan, and he was from Orange, New Jersey. He became a good friend of mine. And unfortunately, he got killed in Korea. But anyhow, he helped me go through it. Plus, I started to pray. Every night I made the sign of the cross. I said, please, God, where's my guardian angel to get me out of here? This is really getting uptight. Well, anyhow, make a long story short, I survived. I learned how to read. I learned how to grasp from the manual. I started to write where I could understand what I wrote. And every time the DI asked me a question, I answered him. Some were right and some were wrong. But as long as I gave him a good answer, he accepted it. But the point I'm bringing out is that if I didn't meet this gentleman, I probably would have got kicked out of the Marine Corps because I didn't know how to really read or write. And I'm sure there's a lot out there that have the same situation, that they can't grasp what they read. That's very important in life. Well, anyhow, I did the 12 weeks. I survived. And actually, when they give you the ball and anchor, the Marine Corps emblem, you stick out your chest. You say, boy, I made it. Thank God. Because every time you do something, you're going to thank God. I said, thank God. I said, wherever you are, St. Jude, keep me in your prayers. And as far as I was concerned, he did. So then I did 12 weeks in Camp Pendleton. So it was TNR infantry training to go to Korea. So when you're in training, you never think about the war, because the only war I ever saw was in a movie house. You know, in my day, it was not as horrifying as it today. It was black and white. You didn't see any gory stuff like today. So the only thing we saw was people get shot, they fall down, and that was it. Well, then we finally got our orders. It was the middle of March or something like that. We had to board the ship. Well, while I was in Camp Pendleton, we had a few situations there. They had a few mountains that when you didn't qualify, you had to go up these mountains. It was twice the distance as a normal one. It was like your punishment. And this is where respect, and especially to your fellow man, because here's where you help each other. You know, in life you're going to go along and you're going to, you know the old saying, love thy neighbor. And that's going to happen to you because you're going to need help. There was a couple of times I couldn't make that mountain. You know, we were marching or running, and if it wasn't for a buddy of mine or two buddies of mine that took my rifle or my pack, I would have fell down. I couldn't make it. You know, and that's terrible when you're knowing that you're going to go to a country that you don't know and you're going to fight and you can't make a mountain. But my friends, my comrades helped me, and I also helped them when they had a problem. It was all teamwork, special teamwork that the Marine Corps, well, all the military has that. Marine Corps just has a little more because they have very strict discipline. And their motto is one for all and all for one. Well, anyhow, we boarded the ship in San Diego, and most of the Marines, most of my friends anyway, say one magic word. Why are we going there? What are we going to do there? Everyone has the same answer. I mean, same question. And our superiors always said the same thing. When you get to Korea, when you get to Japan, you're going to find out what war can do to you. And when you get to Korea, you're going to find out why. Like a wise kid, and went one ear and out the other. Like everybody else, Sure, we'll find out. You don't realize that when you do find out, that you're really finding out, because it don't penetrate. It always penetrates later on. Well, anyhow, we hit Kobe, Japan, and they gave us 2 days liberty because we were on the ship for 14 days. And that's another horrifying deal, because we hit a storm and everybody was in the head. You know what the head is? That's the men's room, it was only the men's room at the time. And everybody was not themselves. They got a lot of seasick. And one night, we hit Kobe, Japan, and we didn't realize at the beginning, as soon as we passed the gate, we see these Japanese soldiers on the side with rickshaws, and some were begging. And the further we got into the town, what we saw was very horrifying. We saw young girls doing what they have to do to survive. And I don't have to explain what they were doing, unless you don't know. They were prostitutes. So that's one thing a war does to you after the war, becomes like a slavery in your own country. Well, at the time, we were just getting off to have a good time, not realizing where we were going. So we boarded the ship again, and we were going to head towards Korea. Now, Korea takes 3 days by boat. And we made the second Incheon landing. The first one was done in 1950. This was 1952. Now, I went overseas with one of my best friends that we enlisted together. And one night, we were on the top deck, and it was kind of pitch black, and off on the horizon, a submarine popped up. And that was our escort. We were on a troop ship. And we both looked at each other, and we both actually cried. We said, we don't know whether we're going to make it or not. Now, we both smoked Camels, okay? I'm sorry, we smoked Lucky Strikes. Now, I had a cousin that my best friend knew anyway, who smoked Lucky Strikes. He was 19 years old, and he was killed in Normandy, okay? Now, we were standing there, and we said, we're going to make a landing. We smoked Lucky Strikes. So we went down to see the chaplain because we got kind of scared, kind of concerned that the next day we were going to make a landing in Incheon. So we went to the chaplain, and he happened to be a Protestant chaplain, and we told him our story. So he says, you can't do nothing about it. You're here. Tomorrow you're going to be there. He says, change your brand of cigarettes. So we changed our brand of cigarettes. So psychologically, we changed so we won't be killed. And that's faith. To me, that was faith, that we had to go down to see the chaplain to ease our minds where we were going. Well, the next day, early in the morning, they advised us. Actually, what they did is they took ammunition boxes out, and we had to load our belts with ammunition and take 2 bandoliers. And the evening around 3:30, quarter to 4, I think it was on the 1st or the 2nd of April, we had to go down a landing barge, the rope of the ship, into the landing barges. So we got into the landing barges. Landing barges circle for about a half hour before they make a landing. We were classified as Red Beach. Okay, that's where the rocks were, and we had to go up with a ladder. So we started to swerve for about 20 minutes, and then the officer said, land of departure. That means we're getting close to the land. Lock and load. And lock and load means that you put your ammunition in your weapon and you slam it home and you lock it, because we were coming to the wall very closely. And we did. We got to the wall, but the ramp went down, we climbed the ladder, and we made a successful landing up on the dock area. And then they put us on trucks, and they hauled us up to an area called Ascon City. And we still didn't know the reality of war, because things were shot, fired, not as close as we thought. So the next day, they put us in special units, and when we got into the units, they put us on trucks, and we were going up to the MLR. The MLR is the main line of resistance. In 1952, it was called a stalemate. Anybody knows what a stalemate is? I guess not. A stalemate means that you can't advance. You got to stay where you're put. So we fought like World War I. We fought in trenches. A lot of hand-to-hand combat, but in trenches. And still, you ask your superiors, what am I doing here? What's my goal? So they says, well, you'll find out soon, and your goal is to stay alive. So they put us on trucks to go up to the MLR. It was about 5:30 at night. Started to rain, and we got hit with small arm fire and mortar fire, and we jumped in, and I hit a rice paddy, and it was full of mud, muck, and my face was in it, my whole body was in it, and it started to rain, and a lot of things go through your mind. And the first thing I said, St. Jude, where are you? You have to bail me out. I can't, I don't think I could survive. And I heard a whistle, not like a hiss. And all of a sudden, the firemen stopped. And it started to rain. I mean, pour and pour rain. So the fire was over, and we went up to the MLR. And again, you keep saying, why am I here? What am I doing here? And then in July, I got wounded. I got hit with a grenade, and that made me much more bitter. And I got hit on a hill called 58A. It was called Siberia. And when I got hit, I rolled down a hill, and when I opened my eyes, I saw 2 Asian people over me, and I thought I was a POW. But they were Koreans. They had a unit called Korean Service Group. They used to help take wounded off or dead bodies off the MLR And that's who they were. And the corpsman came over to me, and when he looked at me, I thought he was a minister, a priest, and I thought he was giving me my last rites. And a lot of things go through your mind when you're in pain or you have a problem. So the corpsman says to me, happened to be a medic, a corpsman. He says, do you want morphine? Because they can't give you morphine if you're in shock. And I was partially in shock. But anyway, he gave me morphine, I was fine. He marked my head with the M, and then they put me on a medical jeep, and they brought me to an aid station. The Marines did not have a MASH unit. They had what they call aid station. And then they flew me to a hospital ship. But before that, I was on the Whirlybird, they called. You know, it's a helicopter with two wounded personnel on it. And a pilot came over, and he strapped me in, and then he strapped the other guy in, and he brought us to the hospital ship. And on the way there, he kept looking at me and bringing his thumbs up like this and smiling at me. And I didn't know what he was doing because I was half doped up. My leg, I got a leg wound and a neck wound and a head wound. My leg was twice the size. And so anyway, when he landed, he got out of the helicopter and he came over to me and says, I'm sorry I gave you a bumpy ride. And I thought that was honorable. Now here's another thing with faith. About 40 years later, it was the 50th anniversary of the 1st Marine Division. We had a reunion in Washington, D.C., and I met this pilot. His name was Lieutenant Jim Riley. And we exchanged our time together, and we kept in contact until he passed away about 4 years ago. He lived in Stratford, Connecticut. But that's how faith is when you meet somebody else so many years later. Well, anyhow, I was on a hospital ship for about 4 weeks, and then they transported me back to my unit. Now I was very, very, very bitter. I hated everybody. I hated the Koreans. I hated General MacArthur. I hated the United States because I wanted to go home. And I was not a good Marine anymore. I just hated it. So an incident happened, which I have to tell you this, which changed my whole life. We were on patrol, okay? Small little village. And when we got to this village, it was like a little massacre there. The Chinese killed quite a few people, civilians, in this village. And on the side of the road, there were two little girls, two mothers, two little girls and a little boy. And the mothers were dead, and the two little girls were full of blood, but they were not hurt. The little boy lost his hand, and he was crying. And they were about 5 years old, 6 years old tops. Well, I picked up the little boy, and I took my bandage part, and I wrapped his hand. I took his hand, and I put it in my pocket. I don't know why I did it, but I did it. So this little boy put his arm around me, and he was actually choking me. And I couldn't get him loose, and the corpsman came over, and then we couldn't break his arm loose. He says, you better come. So we hauled a medical jeep, and nearby, I don't know how many miles, there was an orphanage. There was a lot of orphanages in Korea, believe it or not. There was over 70,000 orphanages in Korea after the war. Well, anyway, we brought him to this missionary, and the reverend there was also a doctor, and there was an American from the 2nd Division chaplain there. So we brought him into this area. We put the boy down, and they says they'll take care of him. And I walked out, I went back to the Jeep, and I remembered I had his hand in my pocket. Well, I went back, and I gave him the hand. The little boy died. And this is what made me a better man. He had no life himself. And then I realized why I was there. I was there to send for a purpose. The Lord sent me there to do a job, to stamp communism, to help people so they won't be in slavery and suffer the communism way. And I realized that then what the officers were trying to say. There'll be times when you know why you're there. And it's the same thing in life. You may say it now. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? There's somebody up there telling you what to do. And that guardian angel, it will be with you all the time. You don't realize it. You may not see him. You may not have an incident, but somebody's there. They're always there. Remember, the Lord is with you. Well, anyhow, after that, I became a military man with a purpose and a mission to help these South Koreans get their freedom. And we did. There were a lot of other incidents that happened that just... Thank you. Thank you very much. You have any questions? No? Come on, all these people here, they don't have a question. Here's one. Sure. We got 3 or 4 minutes. Anybody want to help me out? There's somebody down there.
Were you like fighting against the Japanese or the Chinese?
What did she say?
I heard Japanese.
Were you fighting with the Japanese or the Chinese?
No, only the Chinese. The Japanese were not in a war. They were in a war in the 40s. This was the 50s. Japan was settled down. When I was there, we were fighting strictly Chinese. The North Koreans, we practically wiped them out. North Korea lost over 500,000 people. So now we're fighting Chinese.
I have a question as well. Can you give us a little bit more about your life after the war? How your life continued on, coming back, the thankfulness that remains in your heart till today? Thank you.
When I first got discharged, I got a medical discharge. I was in the hospital for several months. So when I got out, I was a little bitter too, again, because I wanted to stay in the Marine Corps as long as possible, but they said no. So for the first 3 years, I was under the treatment with the VA. I used to go twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, for certain treatments for PTSD or for whatever else that bothered me. But then I realized that my grandfather, again, he said to me, you know, you're a man now, you should get your act together. So he says, go to school. So that's what I did. I realized that I needed an education. And here's my grandfather, who was a wise man. Oh, even my father. And he says, you used to be a bum. So I went to school. I went back to school. I went to a school for drafting, but I also had to get a high school diploma, which I didn't have. So I went to a night school to get my equivalency diploma. I always look for a shortcut. That's not too good in life, but sometimes it works, but very rarely. So right after I went to a school, I finally got a job in drafting, and then me and my lovely wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, and then we got married, and that was my career. You know, I had my problems. Matter of fact, I couldn't really sleep with my wife for almost 3 years because of my wounds, and we solved that problem. Everything in life is a problem, and everything in life you could solve that problem. Someone along, like I said, a guardian angel could guide you to whatever problem you have. There's somebody that could help you. It could be a friend, it could be a religious person, it could be a relative, but there's always someone that could help you, especially if you put love in there. And then my career was, I became a designer. Matter of fact, my old high school, George Westinghouse, came out with a law that anybody that quit school could get their high school diploma, just sign this document. And I think 5 years ago, they mailed me my diploma. So when I was 75, I got a diploma from George Westinghouse. That's it? All right, I want to thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart, but keep in mind, have faith, have respect. Knowledge is the most important thing in life, and always accept it. As we say in the Marine Corps, simplify. Hoorah!